that the mind's confined to the head. It's nothing but the activity of the brain. For the materialists, who represent the majority position within academic life and in science, minds are what brains do, and memories are stored materially inside the brain. It's all inside the brain. I think that's an incredibly truncated and narrow view. First of all, I think we access our memories by morphic resonance. They're not inside the brain. And secondly, I think that our consciousness, our minds, are not confined to the inside of our heads, but stretch out beyond them through fields. We're all used to the idea of magnetic fields being inside magnets and stretching beyond them, or the gravitational field of the Earth being inside the Earth and stretching out into space invisibly, or the fields of cell phones being inside the cell phone and stretching invisibly around it, which is why they work. All matter now has fields associated with it. And of course the brain does. It has electromagnetic fields you can measure with an electroencephalograph. But I think that the fields of the mind are much more extensive. And these extended fields of the mind are a kind of morphic field. So it's really a field theory of the mind.
This lecture is entitled LSD and the Art of Conscious Living. And tonight I am acting the role of Richard Alpert. I'm so used to starting these meetings that I've been holding on the West Coast with a legal disclaimer that rather than break a very adaptive habit, let me start by saying that nothing I will say tonight should in any way be interpreted as my advocating the overthrow of the United States government by force or violence. A few weeks ago, there was an article in Life magazine called Guru Goes to Kansas. And I hope many of you saw it. It was an article that demonstrated that life actually can be beautiful. It concerned Allen Ginsberg. And I would like to put in my bit here, as every other speaker, as many of the other speakers have. As a member of the advisory committee. Yes, sir. As a member of the advisory committee, I was a little concerned that none of us were consulted about dropping Allen from the program. And I think that there is a certain humor in the fact that the University of California didn't consider him a sufficient expert to participate in this conference. And during these few days, he has been, as I understand it, in Washington testifying before the Dodd Committee as an expert in the matter of psychedelics. Now, I'm proud to be at a university that sets itself above the United States Senate. Talk louder, please. How about that? Okay. I originally had planned to speak about the place of transcendental experiences, or that is the transcending of the ego in current science. And I had planned to discuss adaptations that were necessary. And I was going to talk about reality and some of the major quests of man. And then Friday night, I was at the bookstore and I bought a book which, when I read it, I found it had said everything I wanted to say. So rather than make believe I haven't read it, I decided to change my speech and merely recommend to you that you all read the book, because it comes from Abraham Maslow, and better it should come from him than me. The book is called Religions, Values, and Peak Experience. It's a lecture, the Kappa Delta Pi lecture series, and it's Ohio University Press, and I strongly urge that you all read this book. Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences. And he poses in there a series of questions which are the basic questions which you can divide into any number you want, but he characterized them very well. And they seem to be the questions to which the psychedelic experience and the way in which it changes your life are directed. And I thought I might just review briefly by reading to you Abe Maslow's list. He says you can consider these spiritual, philosophical, religious, humanistic, or ethical questions. What is the good life? What is the good man? The good woman? What is the good society, and what is my relation to it? What are my obligations to society? What is best for my children? What is justice, truth, virtue? What is my relation to nature, to death, to aging, to pain, to illness? How can I live a zestful, enjoyable, meaningful life? What is my responsibility to my brothers? Who are my brothers? What shall I be loyal to? What must I be ready to die for? Now, tonight, I am primarily concerned with social institutions that we can conceive of that will help us realize some of the effects of psychedelic experiences. Now, I am not completely out of contact with reality, and I am therefore still aware of the legal and political hysteria which is surrounding the psychedelic issue. The ill-advised and irresponsible action of the California legislature, going against the advice of their own research staff and the guidelines laid down by the federal government, the present training course of the FDA in which guns are being issued to the agents to deal with us, Goddard, head of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Goddard, yesterday in the newspaper, calling consciousness expansion as a product of psychedelics, quote, sheer bunk, unquote. Now, I might get quite concerned about all of this, but the other day I was with a friend of mine who used to be a pusher. Now, he only sold psychedelics at very low prices, and it was very good quality, and he sold it to people he loved, because he thought that was a humanly beautiful thing to do. And then when things got a little hot, he decided to go out of business. And I was asking him whether or not this was a hardship on him to go out of business. And he said, no, it was fascinating because he realized that as most of the people like him would stop selling chemicals, the mafia would move in. And he knew that sooner or later they would test the product. And what fascinated him, as it fascinates me, now, in discussing these social institutions, the issue that this situation in the government is raising concerns the interface between any kind of institution you could set up and the society in which that institution must function. And in the past few years, I've been identified with some institutions for which there has been some tension in the interface. In Mexico, in Millbrook, and then I have spent time with Ken Kesey and the Hells Angels. And all of these are involved in social institutions with which there is some tension between the institution and the larger society. Now, what is being created by present legislation is merely intensifying, as far as I can see, the tension that exists within this interface. And I have suggested, along with colleagues, some alternatives to the government's present position. One of them, which a number of us have been suggesting, is that the government use the limited licensing which it uses for radioisotopes to set up centers which can be privately financed, government-controlled, where any responsible citizen could come and have a psychedelic experience for whatever reason he might choose. This would be allowing maximum freedom and yet some control and protection. It is now clear to me that well over 70% of the people who use psychedelics are not the least bit interested in being criminals. They are not feeling rebellious towards society. And they would welcome any reasonable alternative to the one that is currently being proposed, which is control out of existence for most of all of us. In a book that is coming out the day after tomorrow, in which I collaboratively non-collaborated with Sidney Cohen, I suggested in there that I wrote an open letter to the head of the Health, Education, and Welfare, Secretary Gardner, in which I suggested that they set up an agency similar to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Agency, and that they call the agency the Internal Flight Agency, or IF Agency. And that the agency licensed people over 16 years of age who could successfully demonstrate that they could indeed take off and land safely. And the pilot's license you would get would allow you only to fly with other licensed pilots. It would be much later that you would get a solo license. And that in addition, the IF agency would provide ground control centers that you could call into if you needed help, if you got lost in the clouds. And furthermore, it would provide maps and charts for special journeys you might like to take. Now, when you think about it, there are a lot of planes sitting out at the airport, and we don't all go out and jump into them and fly away just for fun. We're all perfectly willing to go out and get licensed when we want to fly. And it isn't as unrealistic as it may sound at first glance. The Los Angeles CBS just called and they said, did we hear in your news conference that you said there should be an agency like the Federal Aviation Agency? So I gave him a statement, and at the end he says, well, if that's what you want to say. There's nothing much to lose anymore, you know. Well, now we can say, all right, taking the society as it presently exists, what kind of social institutions do and don't and could exist that we would be interested in? Now, let me give you an example of one I tried to develop that didn't work. It couldn't exist, apparently. A while back here in down in Los Angeles, there was a Dr. Gary Fisher, who was working in the back ward of a hospital with autistic children. Not artistic children, autistic children. These are children who, at the earliest stages of their development, somehow have failed to relate to the outside world. So the result is that nothing that comes in from the outside alters their thought process, so they don't learn anything. They're turned off to the outside world, if you will, by a very early learning experience. There's nothing organically wrong with them. Now, Dr. Fisher invited us to sit in on one of his sessions, and we came in near the end of it. This was a session in a back room, in a room in the hospital. It had been fixed up. It had drapes and carpets. Tchaikovsky was playing on the record player. There was a medical student who was a sitter during the day, and he was holding the child. And this was a 9-year-old child who had been administered LSD earlier in the day. Now, I've worked as a child psychologist for a number of years, and I've seen many autistic children. And you could go right onto the back ward there and see them, and you could see the way in which they related to the environment. This child under LSD in this setting had a look of complete and open wonder in his eyes. And if ever I had seen anybody turned on to the world, it was that child. Now, the unfortunate situation there was that at the end of the session, the child was sent back into the ward. And those of you that have had psychedelic sessions can imagine what that all must be like. Now, the reason I bring this up, there is some research going on in New York with autistic children, but in this case, they give them LSD as if they were giving them penicillin. There is no attempt to deal with a psychological setting for the child. Now, the reason this interests me is because of a theory we've been playing with for a long time that concerns primarily animal research. And for many of you that have heard this, this is just a quick review. It concerns imprinting. In animal research, there are stages in development during which an animal seems to be very open to certain kinds of stimuli out in the environment. And if these stimuli occur, he makes a built-in response. If during these critical periods, they're called, the stimulus doesn't occur in the environment, he never makes the appropriate response. For example, with sheep, if you separate the lamb from the flock during a critical period, then when that period is passed, if you bring the sheep in with the rest of the sheep, he will hang out alone rather than with the other sheep. And sheep hang out together, so he becomes a unique sheep in the group. This is an example of failure, if you will, to imprint the group during a critical period of his development. Well, now, if you apply this metaphor, and consider it only a metaphor, to human development, you could argue that at different stages in our development, different months, there are different critical periods during which time we are open to different kinds of experiences. This fits in, by the way, with the Freudian model of psychosexual stages of development and so on. Now, the reason further that I'm interested in this is because I'd noticed that even though all of us have had hundreds of sessions together, and each of us have even had many hundreds, I could still recognize all the people in the group. Certainly many of our characteristics were different, but Tim was still Tim, and Carol was still Carol, and Jane was Jane, and so on. And I was curious what the depths of the LSD experience were all about. And it seemed to me that what had happened was that we could deal very easily with the superficial personality characteristics and behaviors and the philosophical insights, but some of the core personality characteristics didn't seem to be open to our investigation, and I felt it was primarily because we didn't know how to program sessions to explore those areas. Then I realized why we don't know much about core personality is because everybody has one. It's like a Ford assembly line. All the Fords come out, so you never even know how it works because they all look the same. But autistic children are the one group where it goes wrong right at the beginning. And it stood to reason that if we could take these autistic children and indeed explore with them through LSD, we might indeed learn something about this initial laying down of core personality concepts. Well, I wanted to correct for Gary Fisher's problem, and so I designed a study which would be run out at a country estate with doctors and so on, and we would have 2 rooms so that the child would move from the room he started in through the session into a whole new setting after the session. He'd be out with trees and rocks and water and so on. And I presented this in great detail through a number of medical and doctorate, PhD people to the state of Connecticut. And 7 months went by, and I had a number of letters from the President's Commission on Mental Retardation. And finally, I got turned down. And the reason I got turned down was the inside statement, well, fluoridation is a hot issue for us this year, and we can't risk 2 hot political issues in 1 year. Now, you can all that know NIMH be reasonably assured that NIMH would not sponsor such a project either. So this is an example, if you will, of a type of study which cannot be done at this moment in this kind of a relaxed, loose setting because of the panic concerning LSD and the need for close institutional linkage. There is another institution I mentioned briefly which can't exist, although various of us are trying, and this concerns setting up a telephone emergency call service. Now, one of us has indeed been trying to do this, but I point out to her as well as to myself when we all thought about it, that if you were to list the telephone number in Los Angeles and say, anybody that's in trouble, call this number and we'll send a sitter over to be with you. This is a human service to be provided. The reaction of the government would be to tap the phone and arrest the people it would call. So here again is another social institution that we would like to set up that existing legislation does not allow a natural process to occur that would otherwise occur. Now, let me shift to a second institution which is emerging in spite of everything. In 1965, we wrote up a model that was suggested a year earlier by Dr. Metzner, a model for a discotheque church, for a rock and roll spiritual endeavor. In our search, this is from the brochure, in our search for collaborative psychedelic game, we have evaluated various possibilities in terms of the following criteria. Can the game be designed to remain fluid? Will the game raise the ecstasy level of the participants? Will the game involve an honest and open contract with society? Will the game be legally and financially sound? We have considered a variety of models mindful of the above criteria. We have chosen this new vehicle after careful assessment. As you well know, rock and roll and other strongly rhythmical folk music in its various guises provides an expanding segment of the population its musical diet. Moreover, it is demonstrable that this same music in its electrical nature is capable of turning on large groups of people. See Time magazine's Everybody's Turned On. And if they say it, that's... People of diverse ages and backgrounds find a common denominator in this music, which enables them to transcend their individual realities and join in group dance and group song. Long the function of music in tribal and traditional societies. Viewing this phenomenon from a spiritual viewpoint, we observe the relationship both in form and content with certain modes of religious music which have been created for the objective purpose of causing the dancer-listener to transcend himself through involvement with rhythms which are related to physiological phenomena such as heartbeat, the electrical phenomena of the autonomic nervous system, pulse, rate, breath, etc. Now, we had no sooner gotten the idea on the drawing board. We were obviously part of the zeitgeist because Ken Kesey very shortly thereafter started to appear with what were called his acid tests. Now, the acid test, when you read about it in the Los Angeles Times or in some of the other papers, San Jose Mercury, really sounded pretty scary. Here were a group of unknowing people coming to a dance hall, and LSD was being put in the lemonade, and people were having sessions in this large group scene. Now, I went to some of the acid tests, and in fact, I don't think there were very many people, in fact, I don't think there were hardly any at the ones I was at, that ever ingested any chemical that they didn't expect they were going to ingest. And I would say that of all of the group religious experiences I have ever been at, when some of the group snake dances were going on in the midst of these acid tests with a very powerful primitive beat, and the feelings, or what I now call in my more far-out state, the vibrations, being so intense, I was awed that people in the age range of 17 to 25 could participate and collaborate in as profound an emotional experience in as humanly loving a way as they did. What they had done, and what others are doing, and what you'll get a chance to see in part when Geert Stern and the USCO group have their show, is the control of the total environment, the auditory and visual environment simultaneously. And when there is a group agreement to, in a sense, check one's ego at the door, the experience for many of the people, especially when it is compounded with a strobe light, for example, is a tremendously intense and powerful one. And I look at the rock and roll groups that currently exist. Now, it is a known fact to me, although probably not a publicly statistically known fact, but it is I'll make an estimate, let's not call it a fact. I will make an estimate that 85 to 90% of the current rock and roll groups use psychedelics, okay? From the top on down. And the kind of music that has been coming out of these groups, which is very interesting because it differs from jazz where the soloist improvised and it was his game. The improvisation is intensely a group experience. Just the titles of these groups, the Grateful Dead, the Lovin' Spoonfuls, just imagine that. Lovin' Spoonfuls play a song, Do You Believe in Magic? Now, in the influence of the East in rock and roll music with the sitar and the rhythms, the Eastern rhythms. And it certainly doesn't, what my suggestion is, here is a social institution right under our very noses that has come in with all of the values that come out of the psychedelic experience through all of the lyrics of these songs, through the rhythms, through the group experiences that are created around them. It's existing, it's going on, and all of the kids between 17 and 25 are hearing it. the suggestions that are, the disc jockeys have an index like the Catholic Church. And Bob Dylan's record Stoned is on the index, as is a one by the Byrds. Now, it doesn't seem likely to me that any control of that nature, but you see, there it is going to change. Now, it's very interesting that the record Stoned by Bob Dylan has been ruled out, while the record Stoned by Ray Charles, Bob Dylan's record is called Rainy Day Woman, by the way. The Ray Charles version is allowed in because that's about alcohol. But it's still, let's go get stoned, but it's an alcohol referent rather than clearly a psychedelic referent. If you're a devotee of rock and roll music, as I have become, you will be fascinated to notice, for example, the difference between what is the alcohol culture, which is reflected in somebody like Nancy Sinatra, and her record, Boots Are Made for Walking, and that's what they shall do. Now, when after the Mafia, we go that whole cycle, she will be singing The Word Is Love, as I understand it. That'll probably send me to jail. Now, all right, so there, whether you've noticed it or not, is a social institution that has come right in and seems to be going right along. And now it's getting all American, and you can go to the Longshoremen's Hall and get an American version of this without the LSD, but with lights and colors and music, and people are experiencing something. Not as much as they would with acid, of course, but something. And this is cropping up in all of the major cities in the United States. Okay, now, even in this society the way it is now, I'd like to suggest a social institution which has not yet made its appearance, but will. There has been an article circulated that is going to be discussed by Dr. Cohen, an article by Eric Cast. This is the second in a series of research projects he has done in which LSD is administered to terminal cancer patients. Now, one of the unfortunate aspects of Dr. Cast's study is that it's administered to them as a painkiller with no other preparation than that. But it's still an interesting study. And when I read it in the World Medical News a few years ago, the phrase that haunted me was a quote from one of the patients in which the patient said, "I know I'm dying, but look at the beauty of the universe." Right? I know I'm dying, but look at the beauty of the universe. And that clicked in my computer with the memory of a woman whom I visited in Canada when I was speaking up there. She was close to 80, and I asked her why she was interested in LSD, because she had come to my lecture. And her answer was, well, the next major thing I have to do in life is to die. And I suspect that LSD may have something to do with this. Okay? There's the second bit of data I want to feed in. The third concerns Aldous Huxley's book Island, in which he gives an actual blueprint for a psychedelic death, in which the wife of the doctor experiences the dissociative moment, and the whole experience of dying is a positive, liberating one. Now, when you read that, you were amazed at how disparate it was from any known real-life experience of death you knew about in this culture, at least for me. Because almost without exception, in this culture, you are surrounded at times of death by people who deny death. because there is a taboo about death that is much stronger than any sexual taboo you could ever imagine. So that as you're dying, people are saying you're looking better. As you're taking your last breath, you'll be up and around tomorrow. No confrontation with up where, around where, just up and around. It was in 1961 or 2, I guess, that Tim Leary showed me the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it was on a Saturday, and I had had a session on a Thursday night with psilocybin. And as I leafed through this book, which was 2,500 years old, I came to a passage in the section on second Bardo hallucinations, which brought me up short, because there, in very minute detail, was a description of the psychedelic experience I had had on Thursday night, and which I had described on Friday as ineffable. Okay? How could I have experienced something which was written 2,500 years earlier as a manual to prepare people to die and be reborn? Well, all of my thoughts had been anticipated by Tim and Ralph, who are already busy working on the adaptation of the Tibetan book as a psychedelic manual. The argument being that one could look at this book as an esoteric metaphor concerning psychological death and rebirth, the transcendence of the ego, or, if you will, the psychological death of you as you know yourself to be. Now, here is an exact relationship between the physical and the psychological that is worth noting. Now, it seems, if you put all of these things together, that it might be conceivable to set up an institution. Let's imagine it's in the mountains or by the ocean. It should be oceanic or cosmic. And this would have small little domes, houses, and a person would come there to prepare to die. I hope you're all not too frightened about this topic for me to be talking about. Now, you could have as much medical help as you wanted. Right? And furthermore, you could die in whatever religious metaphor you chose. You'd always find a psychedelic rabbi, psychedelic priest, perhaps, psychedelic ministers. There are lots of them. But in addition, when you came into the place, you would be assigned a psychedelic guide. And the whole orientation and approach would be one of dealing with training for how to get free of the ego, which creates so much of the pain and anguish concerned with dying. Now, as an aside, it's interesting to think of who the staff would be, because what you'd need are experienced people who have had many psychedelic sessions, gone in and out of their egos many times. Well, here we might go to the acid test to look for our staff. And indeed, when you think of the youth being what are called fringe members of society, because all they know how to do is to transcend their consciousness, apparently, we have now found a new social institution which employs them. Since I must be economically realistic, I must point out to you that everybody dies. My first experience with psychedelics started me on a journey. And there have been a number of metaphors that I have used along with my colleagues to describe this journey. It seemed to be a journey that concerned increased awareness. Now, I, as a Westerner, had always thought of evolution in terms of Darwinian evolution, and I had thought in terms of biological evolution. And then as a Westerner further, when I wanted to think of another model of evolution, I could think in terms of the evolving of man's mind. And as we got smarter and smarter, we were getting higher up on some kind of evolutionary scale. But there is yet another kind of evolution, which didn't seem to dawn on me in my sleepwalking state. And that evolution seemed to be one concerning consciousness. That there apparently were some higher states of consciousness. And this first session showed me a glimpse of these higher states and started me on a journey which was quite irrevocable. In fact, it didn't leave me any choice of whether I wanted to be on this journey or not. Because once one saw the possibility of living at any other level of consciousness, which seemed to involve increased awareness, sensitivity, love, unity, it was an interesting person that could turn away. And an Eastern mystic with whom I have been in extensive correspondence has suggested that it is this experience which is addictive. It's not the drug. And I share with him that feeling. That once I have been, quote, there, and for there, so I don't sound like like too much, let me reference Frank Barron's remarks yesterday, because he certainly is straight, a psychologist. And he listed a number of criteria for consciousness. He did it exquisitely, so I'd like to borrow his list. The first one he suggested was range of effective attention. That is the experience of simultaneously being conscious of many levels of awareness. So that I can understand that at the same time I am involved in what you will excuse my language is the game of lecturing, right? I can also, I think, stand aside and see myself involved in the game of lecturing. And I also can jump to some other levels of consciousness in which I can see relationships between us other than the social role which we are presently involved in, that is, of lecturer and audience. And at times I even realize that we are all slowed down light. Now, the second point Frank makes is the realization of depths and heights for which no words exist. And I want to read to you a very brief example of that. This is in a book called Black Elk Speaks. It's the life story of a holy man of the Ogallala Sioux. And it's an extraordinary book, and it describes this black elk's first mystic visionary experience, which sounds very much like hundreds of psychedelic reports I have back in the files. This is the one he had when he was 9 years old. And he said, "And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell, and I understood more than I saw. For I was seeing in a sacred manner the shapes of all things in the Spirit, and the shape of all shapes as they must live together like one being. And I saw that the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy. I am sure now that I was then too young to understand it all, and that I only felt it. It was the pictures I remembered, and the words that went with them, for nothing I have ever seen with my eyes was so clear and bright as what my vision showed me. And no words that I have ever heard with my ears were like the words I heard. I did not have to remember these things. They have remembered themselves all these years. It was as I grew older that the meanings came clearer and clearer out of the pictures and the words. And even now I know that more was shown to me than I can tell. And I think for most of us that describes a component of our own experiences. The third thing Frank mentions is sensitivity of breadth of consciousness of others. Now here I think that there is an absolutely fascinating research area concerning empathy and ESP. When I was running a session, guiding a session, at one point a fellow said to me, now let me explain what I was doing. I was lying there listening to the music and I was being with him. Now this is in silence. So that primarily what happened was I suddenly got a picture of the inside of his head. And it looked like caves, and there were waterfalls, and it was dark and mysterious and jungly. And I was in the midst of this, and suddenly he turned to me and he said, "Are you inside my head?" Right? Now I put that away because those are the kind of things you don't like to think about. And about a week later, I was guiding a session for a political science professor at Harvard. And this time I got another visual image, and I was in a French cathedral, very stately, kind of cold, formal. And while I was walking with my footsteps echoing down the halls of this cathedral, he turned to me and he said, "I have the strangest feeling that you're inside my head." That's the way chance works. At one point, I had a session with a fellow. We took 700 micrograms in the middle of a day, sitting in two upright chairs facing one another in an empty room. He had created the setting, I had not. Now, this was a little much for me, and I found myself glued against the back of the chair while he danced about me, playing the horn, whispering in my ear, showing me beautiful jewels, putting on strange hats. And finally, I went to the floor thinking to myself, if there only wasn't so much light, at which point he walked over and he pulled down the shades. So I thought about that, and I figured, well, that's silly. You know, that's just chance. But what I need is about 10 minutes rest. I thought that, and he said, oh, take 20 or 30. And then he walked over to me and he looked down at me and he laughed. Now, it strikes me that if you read the many reports of ESP experiences that are available, that most of the experiences involve two minds that were working very much in parallel. Mother and child, husband and wife, two intimate friends. And that when you use an experimenter and a subject who hardly know each other at all, you often don't get much better than chance. Although J.B. Rhine has worked hard to show some slight statistical gain. And it seems obvious to me that a very real set of researchers can and should be done, in which one creates an opportunity for two people to get, if you will, their mind in phase with one another through the use of psychedelics. Finally, the fourth category that Frank mentions is ability to observe and yet not observe the subject-object distinction. That is, to experience the feeling we are all one at the same time as maintaining the distinctions that exist among us. Now, it is very interesting that the LSD experience comes at a time when Marshall McLuhan, for example, points out that we are in the electric age, when we can extend our central nervous system through technological means to the point where the world becomes like a big village, because everything is instantaneous. We know everything that's going on everywhere in the village. And Buckminster Fuller tells us that it's gotten to the point now where if we all collaborated, there could be enough for everybody. And then we have these psychedelic experiences in which we experience unity and we seek collaborative relationships. And as I experience a unity in the universe, in the world, let's say, I find it very desirable to make it all subject. And I also understand that almost any learning can occur almost instantaneously if one is able to get rid of the subject-object distinction between that which one learns and that which is learned. And you have all had that experience of one trial learning under conditions where you were really, quote, turned on to the thing you were learning. Okay, now I'm going to stop shortly, but what I asked myself was, well, okay, if this experience is so great, how could I stay high all the time? I could put it in a little more serious vein. Say, how could I stay in a state of ecstasis? That is a fluid cognitive state. How could I be fully conscious all the time? Well, it's very tempting to figure if you just keep using enough LSD, it'll do it. So we got 5 of us together and we went into a house and we decided to stay high forever. Now, in order to do this, we had to take 400 micrograms every 4 hours, or 2,000 micrograms a day. And we carried this experiment out roughly in more or less formal fashion, but continuing on the dosage for 3 weeks. Now, it's very interesting about that experiment, first of all, that I'm here to tell about it. And just a few of the interesting aspects of it. First of all, it was apparent to me that you do not stay at the highest state of consciousness for 3 weeks. You do not stay with the clear white light. You do not stay where all is one in a completely homogeneous field. you stay much more at what you'd call second bardo. You go way out, and then you come back to some middle level, but you definitely stay with a heightened sense of awareness. And then I found an interesting thing about sleep patterns, because you, after a while, you don't go to sleep, and you don't go to sleep, and then you go into neutral. And you're there, and yet you're completely at rest. And 3 weeks later, when I emerged, I was just as physically healthy. That's when I went in, rested. Okay. And I realized we broke that experiment up. It fell apart because we had not made realistic arrangements for dealing with the interface between that experiment and the rest of the world. Because during that experiment, during the initial stages of the experiment, it wasn't possible to carry on a set of external game commitments or external social contract. And it would seem to me a very reasonable research to carry such an experiment out under conditions where you provide a supportive environment to see what indeed will happen. There was change. But the interesting thing was, when we stopped taking the LSD, we all came down. Well, in the past few years, knowing that the government might get some controls on, and also in an attempt to find other ways that one could build into one's life, I've been involved with a macrobiotic diet at some length, with karate at some length, a student of Gurdjieff, of Mayor Baba, been involved in dance groups, have been involved in meditation and breathing exercises. Once I had had one psychedelic experience, all these other things worked. Because once you have been one time outside of yourself, and you know where that place is, it's the easiest thing in the world to get back there. And then I started to understand that it was going to be the way in which we created our environment or setting that was going to determine whether we could stay fully conscious all of the time. Because obviously, LSD wasn't going to do it. As I understood LSD now, all it did was show you the possibility or remind you of the possibility, but you still had to do the things in your everyday life to make it all work. See, it's a very interesting thing that the Easterner spends 10, 12 years turning off all of his attachments, getting free of all of his commitments, going to the mountaintop, meditating, eating nettle soup, living through snow and sleet and rain, and finally he experiences enlightenment. Maybe, if he's 1 in 10. 1 in 10 after 12 years commitment. Very poor probabilities. But once he's made it, then he can probably retain that heightened sense of integrity with the whole universe because he doesn't have any environment that's going to bring him down. He doesn't go back into a network of habits that are going to catch him back up again. The Westerner doesn't have time. He's not going to go sit in the mountaintop for 12 years with a 1 in 10 chance, right? But there is a help for him because along come psychedelics mysteriously, just as he's about to blow himself to oblivion. And here now with DMT, we can assure a businessman that during his lunch hour he can have a totally... But probably at 2 p.m. he'll be just as hung up as he was at 10. With a memory in addition, the memory of what that openness was like. So it may turn out, you see, that all the drug did was to take we cynical Westerners and give us hope by showing us the possibility and starting us, as I was started, on a journey which is irrevocable. And that the journey will end up taking just as long as it would have had we done it in the East on faith, without knowing what the end point was like. But we didn't have enough faith to do it. Now, we have been through a series of many social community experiments trying to create an environment that would allow you to maintain full consciousness. And all of them have failed, and all of them have taught us a great deal. And I think the word failure is the wrong word. They've all ended. They've ended because they were completed, because we saw the fallacy or the limit of the situation, or it was time to change into another institution. But out of it all, I have come up with some basic rules, I feel, that are reasonable for entering into a community game designed to provide an environment for you to have maximum consciousness. The first thing involves the numbers. While I think that the acid tests are great for a fleeting moment for many people, large groups provide many nooks and crannies for egos to hide in. At the other end of that continuum, the number 1 is a very risky number to work with, because it appears very easy for you to get caught in your own defenses and be unable, if you will, to up-level them or see through them or get beyond them. Gurdjieff, the Russian philosopher, puts it very well. He says, you don't realize your predicament. You're all in prison. Prisons of your mind, of your learned mind. Were you to escape, the first thing you must realize is that you're in prison. After all, if you think you're free, you can't escape from prison. Second thing is, you can't escape alone. You need the help of others. And then finally, he points out that you need maps and guides, because after all, you've been in prison ever since you can remember. You don't even know which way is out. Okay? So that if we say, well, 1 isn't quite enough, we try 2, which is the marriage unit that exists in our present society, which seems to be having a hard sledding. Problem of 2 is that people get locked in power struggles, and there's nobody to arbitrate. And sometimes when those struggles get powerful enough, they can ride right through LSD sessions. Well, maybe the number 3, but that's a very sexually risky number. So maybe 4 is the best unit to work with at first. Take 2 couples, because a couple is really the basic unit. Now, if I can understand why most of our experiments have ended, it's because we haven't had the courage, if you will, or the knowledge or the wisdom to set up contracts for the communities in advance of a specific enough nature. It's too easy to get a group of groovy people and say, well, what do you say, let's all live together and it'll be great and we'll all have sessions and we'll go places. Or just to open the door and in come 10 people and you close the door and there's your group. So there is some kind of contract, because these kinds of groups often end up in somebody saying, well, look, that isn't what I'm here for. Right? So it's better to set it out in front. So in front, it is agreed that we are a group on a journey together. And that this journey, the goal of this journey is to increase each of our awarenesses, and that we have decided to travel as a group. Now, if you want to travel as an individual, do so, but don't join a group. Right? There's a very specific type of group I'm talking about now, but it works, as far as I understand thus far. Make the definition of the goals as explicit as possible. It has got to be built into the contract that the person understands that the risk is his own identity as he knows himself. This leaves not open to him what is known as the cop-out of saying, oh, well, after all, that's me. That's the way I am. Okay? That's not available. The next thing is that for the first period of time after the group is formed, it can do little other than primarily deal with its own unfolding. And every participant must be ready for total confrontation at all times. That is, there is no place to hide. Can't get up cranky in the morning and say, leave me alone, I'm cranky. Can't go into the bathroom and close the door and say, well, I'll be in here and I'll think hateful thoughts while they're not around. It is a constant 24-hour commitment to being with the other members of this group, and the contract reads, I define, to the extent that I am capable, my basic reference group as the group rather than myself, the individual. Now, if you're not ready to enter into that group, then try another method. Now, the next point is that the contract must demand complete honesty at all times, and trust to the extent that you are able. Now, honesty and trust mean something different than to people that have been in psychedelic experiences or have been in frightening experiences with others than it does to other people. Very often you're going to have a session with somebody and you say, well, now, it's important that you trust me and that you be honest with me. The person says, oh, I'm honest, I trust you. And you start the session, and suddenly the person looks at you, and you know from the look in his face that smoke is coming out of your nose, your ears have gotten points on them, you're breathing fire, and you say, I bet I look pretty awful, which is an understatement, and he's quivering for you. Because the level at which he said, I trust, wasn't nearly the depth of the level of trust that was demanded. Because suddenly he's thinking, what am I doing in this room with this idiot who's given me this drug? Am I out of my mind? Which he is, of course. And very often people have returned from psychedelic sessions. Well, the one thing I certainly learned was how much I didn't trust anybody, and that's why it was so hellish. I was asked recently, how do you account for bad sessions? And my answer was dishonesty. Because I am convinced that a person knows inside of himself just what's going on, and that I have very often gotten into a situation where gone through complicated arrangements to arrange a session, the person's there, and a tremendous cost and effort, but I know I'm not ready. And I have to have the guts to say I'm not ready. And being this honest, you can get confident that your sessions are positive and meaningful. Now, one of the keys that isn't in the contract, but it's a key to the community, is to keep everybody subject. Don't get into any of the hims and hers. It's not me and them, it's us. And when you experience a negative feeling towards somebody else, keep in mind that you have made them object to the extent that you put that feeling in. Next, the community should go as fast as the fastest person, not as fast as the slowest person, because the person that's made the most progress can bring anybody else there very quickly. The group should always move in relation to the person that is most aware at any moment. Briefly, as far as environment is concerned, cut down on external stimuli. Desirable to get away from a high energy center, a city. Get away from all of the complex social vibrations that exist in present cities, if you have an option. No TV. Cut down on newspapers to once a week if you... That's enough news. It'll all be there. Put some control on your telephone. The telephone, as far as I understand it, is like dial a mind. Anytime you want to call somebody else's mind, you dial them, and when it rings, you're supposed to be available. Well, you've got to turn off a lot of the external stimuli for a while until the group starts to function as a unit. Turn on beauty in the environment, and this is what the women are great at. Creating ecstasy in the environment with art, with flowers, with beautiful things that wake you up. Anything that's an alarm clock to wake you up to a higher level of consciousness. Meditative moments and a meditative place in the house, whether it's a meditation room or a separate meditation house, or in Mexico we had a meditation tower, or whether it's a nook in a wall that you go and look into, some place that isn't involved with the economics and the external games that the group is involved in. And as far, finally, as the role of sessions in all of this, I now understand the experiment we went through this winter. We got to the point where it was happening so fast for the four of us that we didn't have time to take LSD. All right? In other words, we all knew what the possibility was. We had all seen each other as all human beings. We had all experienced the unitive moment with one another. Now we realized, and we could see when it wasn't being realized, where the flaw was. There was sufficient consciousness for us to do something systematically to get ourselves to this other state of consciousness. So it may well be interesting that the moratorium that Tim Leary called for a year, which he said was a cooling off period, while I don't share that, I'm not making that call by any means, or even suggesting it, I do say that those of you that have had psychedelic experiences, many of you have come back from these experiences mildly depressed. And this depression, upon close analysis, is because you look and you see that you were involved in some very ugly human games. Social contracts with your marriage partner, in your job, a dishonesty here, a little deception there, a dead subject-object relationship. If you're a teacher, you're going in and looking at the students as them. Right? There's some point in your life that you see, and it's not how it could be. Now, I understand that the LSD experience, just taken once, starts this whole process. And what fascinates me is even the people who have taken LSD and have been backing out of the room from almost the moment they took it. Very nice session, very nice. Thank you very much. Even these people, a year or two later, you know the funniest thing, right? Now, I can't really predict all of the things that will happen as far as the psychedelic world is concerned next. It does seem to me that for many, many thousands of people, a journey has been begun just like my journey. And if it is true that evolution involves increased consciousness, and if indeed I have labeled the journey correctly, perhaps the groundwork has already been laid down. And now all we need to do is listen to ourselves. I'm going to stop now and take questions if you have any.
May I ask 2 questions?
Well, ask one question at one
question. Okay. Now, you've seen this, Bob's views on drugs.
Yes, I have.
That's not my one question.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Go ahead. This is a setup. I mean, I know I'm walking into this one, so I'm ready for it. Sorry. She's ready for it, too.
Okay. I'll try to talk louder. On February...
No, you're going to ask a question now. We're not going to make a point.
I'm going to build up to it because this is one thing you haven't said, and I think it'd be interesting to the audience to know this fact. On February 4th, I believe it was, you said in Berkeley that you no longer anticipated using LSD in the foreseeable future. Now, if the paper is right, the Daily Californian, February 7th, I wonder, and you also said that you wanted to know what a man could, if a man could be a man, what a man could be without the drug. And you thought that it says the only way to achieve a perpetual state in which a man can be a man is through non-chemical means, he said.
I didn't say that.
Okay, it's a
Did you? Oh, that's from me? Okay, then I said it, right.
This is from the...
Check.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Now, you have postulated that the psychedelic guru can be a safe guarantee of a good trip, of a spiritually enlightening trip. And I would ask you, in view of Bob's statement that only a person on the 5th plane, and most of us are not even on the planes, let alone standing in any relation to the inner planes of consciousness, only a person on the 5th plane can safely, without harm to himself or harm to the person that he is supposedly helping, do any good whatsoever in a spiritual way.
Would you ask your question, please?
I want to know what you think of this statement.
Okay.
Do you think you are helping people when you are being a psychedelic guru? Do you think that you are not harming your own spiritual progress?
Thank you, Paula. I'd like to tell you a brief story. One of the things one does as one works with psychedelic chemicals is one continually looks for maps and charts to help you understand more of what you're experiencing. Now, in the course of our searches, a number of us independently have come across the works of an Eastern mystic by the name of Meher Baba. And I found when I read his works, called Listen Humanity, God Speaks, so on, which are available from Sufism Reoriented on Sutter Street, I found that these were most in tune with my own psychedelic experiences. That his descriptions of other levels of consciousness fit in almost identically with my own experiences. And that he also apparently was referring to a lot of things which were experiences I had not shared. And so I used his books as manuals and sessions. And then, from an old graduate assistant of mine, I got a message that Meher Baba had met a young fellow in India who had said to him, you've got to stop taking drugs. And I said what most people say under these circumstances. Well, he told that young fellow, he didn't tell me. Then came the second message from India, which was telling the young fellow to tell everybody. So I was quite bothered by this, so I wrote this man a letter. Now, not meaning to say anything inappropriate, this man is an avatar who says, in effect, I am God in human form, and it's very difficult to write a letter to such a person. But I wrote as honest a letter as I could, and I explained to him what I was doing and how I was using the psychedelics. And he wrote back, or his secretary wrote back, one of the most sophisticated letters concerning drugs I had ever received, in which he said, in effect, the experiences you're having are illusory. They are no more like true transcendence than a mirage is like water. Then, he said, to a few serious spiritual seekers like yourself, LSD may have started you on something, but it can do you no more good. And what you must do now is follow me. Love me enough and I will take you through, because you need a perfect master to get to the seventh plane. Then he said, you may take LSD 3 more times, and then you must stop forever. Well, between the time I'd sent the letter and the time I received the answer, I had taken it once, so that left me either 2 or 3, depending on how you counted. And I started to wrestle with this problem. After all, I'm supposedly sort of in the LSD business in one way or another. I mean, I'm not pushing it, but I certainly am talking about it and thinking about it and built systems about it. And so I didn't answer his letter, and I got a wire, did you receive my letter? And I sent a wire back that I received his letter. And I continued to wrestle in my own mind with this issue. Now, in the past week, I have received, I think, 3 special delivery communications strongly urging me to be wise enough at this conference to present Baba's views and to espouse them. Now, it's very easy to take a reasonably easy way out and say, in effect, well, this guy probably never had LSD. Now, how does he really know? Okay? Except that the letters are very sophisticated. He says, look, I understand the difference between the psychedelics and the opiates. You know? Right? I mean, he's not. And he says, what you get addicted to is the experience, not the drug. But you keep depending on it. And then he instructed a number of his followers in the East and West to set out on a pilgrimage to stop the use of drugs in the United States. Now, up until this point, all of the writings I'd ever read of Mayor Baba said, in effect, don't worry, be happy. Take it easy. It's all happening. Okay. Love is the way. And now suddenly are coming special delivery directives about not doing things, about derangement. Now, my policy under these situations is to look within myself. And I have been doing that as intensively as I know how. I have indeed, Paula, not taken LSD since February 14th. And it just doesn't feel right to me, what he says. And it is not in line with my own experiences. And I am not a person of blind faith. And therefore, in being honest to my own experiences, illusory though they may turn out to be, I must take the position I am taking, because psychedelics indeed took me from being a very limited, very somewhat mechanical Western man and opened my eyes enough so that I could even read Meher Baba without scoffing at him.
Best evidence is...
And the flaw in his letter was saying, a few souls like you. Well, who else?
People you trust.
Questions, please.
You will not be the first.
Dr. Albert, would you please make a comment about Solco and where people may get the information about this organization?
Solco is a non-geographical insemination-dissemination organization, which has its sole existence in Box 309 at Menlo Park. And if you advise them of your address, a lengthy bibliography on consciousness expansion comes your way, along with all of the other things that interest us, along with pictures of Shiva Shaktis and mandalas and stuff like that. It's I realize that all we could hope for as a social institution at this point, you see, I went to Los Angeles and gave some lectures, and there were like 1,000 people there, and then I sent out a questionnaire, said if you want to fill it out, send it in, and hundreds of these questionnaires came back of people saying, let's all collaborate in setting up something humanly beautiful to do. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and I realized that the heterogeneity of all of us, because many of us never took psychedelics, but arrived at the states of consciousness through many other means, that there wasn't any single game we could work at together at the moment. The best thing we could do was set up some kind of a nervous system, which is a mailing list, if you will. And so I just started to offer Box 309 and have been every month or 2 months sending out a mailing as fast as I could afford it. And there are now 8,000 people on the West Coast who are us, whoever we are. And it's a constant stream of the most beautiful letters from a tremendously wide range of people with diverse interests. That's what Solco is. Box 309, Menlo Park.
Do you have any comments about turning on without drugs? I've only turned on once without, but several times with, and it wasn't a dream, but it began in a dream state at the very end of a morning's sleep, and I haven't been able to replicate that sort of experience since. And I'm wondering whether you know anybody that has, or what steps have been made in this direction.
Well, the question concerns turning on without drugs. Abe Maslow's book, whether you're familiar with it or not, or his work, he is concerned with peak experiences. And he points out that most people have had these experiences at one time or another spontaneously, but weren't able to label them, all right? And as you read through his accounts, you find a number of settings that are indeed settings that seem to precipitate these. Now, if you argue that what you mean by turn on is a chemical alteration of the brain, that there is clear evidence that the mystic visionaries and the psychedelic visionaries and the diet visionaries and so on were having some common core spiritual experience, so there was some common chemical alteration occurring to all of them, then you notice that this chemical alteration can be brought about either from the body through the endocrine system or from the cerebral cortex downward, if you will. Then you see that by using, for example, a mantra, repeating some phrase. For example, just one of the little things in Paul Repp's Zen Flesh and Bones in the back of it, like just sit down and get into a very comfortable position, candle, very quiet, or outside, and say, let me slowly turn off my senses, look within, and find my own true self, or my own calm center, or something, and just keep simplifying and simplifying. It's a repeated mantra that will take you there, Now, there are also any number of external
environmental things like mandalas or, various settings or scenes that will do it. You working from your body, it is possible clearly through diet. It's clearly possible through a number of kinds of physical yoga, breathing, for example. But what I was pointing out in that community concern is that there have been times when I've been living in a community when I can come home to this place, hung up, caught, busy being Dick Alpert, angry at power, all my games, walk in and I become high when I walk in the door. Right? And I used to measure houses and say, well, that's about a 75 microgram house.
Would you compare and contrast subjectively psilocybin and LSD?
Contrast psilocybin and LSD.
Subjectively.
Subjectively. Well, that's a little hard for me to do accurately because all my psilocybin experiences were predominantly before my LSD experiences, and I haven't had a psilocybin available to me for a long time. The best I can say at the moment is that, and furthermore, it has... Okay, all right. Okay. When we were taking psilocybin, we were using dosages anywhere from 2 to 20 milligrams and 26 milligrams, something like that. Now, as I understand it, a comparable dose to 200 micrograms of LSD might be anywhere above 60 milligrams instead of the smaller dosage, so that I don't know that I have comparable data. The experience I had with psilocybin, almost all the experiences were of the, if you define a ladder of experiences, let me give you a quick ladder and then I can show you where it is on the ladder. The most probable experience people report is heightened sensitivity, color, kinesthesis, sound, and so on. And that's a very easy thing to experience. And external hallucinations, the walls creeping and crawling and so on. Then the next level of experience is when it's a social situation, is feeling that seeing the other person with figure ground reverse. That is, the ways in which we are different becomes background, and the ways which we are same becomes figure. And that's quite different from the way most of us live every day, where the way in which we're the same is background, and the figure stands out as individual differences, especially among Westerners. Now, under that condition, there is still a you and a me. It's just that we see that you and me are made of the same thing, all right? And we say, wow, you and I are one, but I still see you as you and I as I. Now, it's the next level after that where all that starts to disintegrate, where your body starts to fall apart, and it all starts to turn into energy, for example. Or other levels where it becomes unity in the perceptual sense as well, and the you-ness disappears. Now, as far as I know, most of my psilocybin experiences were at the level where one experienced that social unity, tremendous closeness to other people, we used to call it the love drug, because it just made people so close and at one, and just human love heaps, in the most beautiful sense of the word. All right? And that was psilocybin. Then along came LSD and just blew our minds, It was, it was a whole other level because the LSD then became a very, it was not social. It was not a social drug. It was too profound. It just took you way beyond that. It was all molecules or all energy. And many people have had a great deal of difficulty trying to use LSD as a social drug. Let's take a little LSD and have a groovy evening. Well, now, if you're going to do that, don't do it because it's illegal, but if, hypothetically, if you're planning, I don't know how to say it legally. I have heard that people who have had them, well, I'll give you an example. For example, I've gone to the ballet with LSD, And I can strongly urge people to take it a number of hours before they're going to do anything. And don't try to do any external social game till maybe the 4th or 5th hour, because you may be just a little too much out of contact. Now, the ballet is very interesting. First time I sat in the orchestra watching Nureyev, and it was quite an experience because Nureyev definitely transcends being Nureyev, just becomes the essence of form, and it's an exquisite experience. And he was like just going through space, free space. The next time I did this, I sat in the balcony, and Nureyev wasn't dancing, and the whole thing looked like a species that was trying to fly but hadn't quite made it off the ground yet. And I spent the whole evening with this great sadness because I was caught in the evolutionary significance of the ballet. Sir?
Yeah, I wanted first to thank you for directing your attention to the things that I've been thinking about, giving me some very good answers. And I'd like to ask if you could share with us something more specific of the answer you have about how easy it is to go from knowing where you want to go to finding these other paths such as diet, meditation, and so on. You've said it's easy, and you've given some general indications. I think it'd be something very worthwhile for you to give us just one specific example, perhaps, of how you've done it and how it felt.
Well, it's really what it is, as I understand it, is selective perception. That if you don't know what you're looking for, it's very hard to find it. And at the minute you know what you're looking for, it's practically everywhere you look. And that there practically is nothing in the environment that you can't use as an alarm clock or as some technique to increase your awareness. For example, you're driving down the street, and Gurdjieff has a great exercise. Driving down the street, pick a truck or a sign up a couple of 100 yards ahead and say, see if I can remain completely conscious of my hands on the steering wheel between here and the sign. And you'll be amazed at how difficult that is to do. How quickly you go to sleep and you just wake up and suddenly remember you had even undertaken that task. And you can do a whole set of little, and Gurdjieff has perhaps one of the most sophisticated Western methods suitable for Westerners for waking up, which is a systematic technique for observing yourself. Now, it's very interesting, and I'll be very straight about this. When I went to visit the Gurdjieff groups in New York, I found a lot of people who disappointed me. And then I noticed that a lot of psychedelic people came into the group, and that the man that was running the group found them very responsive to what he was talking about. Right? And I then understood that, again, as I said before, once you know where that point is, then any method is one that you can make use of. And that the people that had psychedelics could make fantastically rapid use of the Gurdjieff method, much more rapidly than the very systematic students who had been working at it but did not have an anticipation of what the end state was like. But if just once you and I have been one, how can we ever really go back into being defensive from one another without somewhere knowing? You know, somewhere knowing? And it's really interesting because the whole life becomes very much like a tennis match in which you are playing the game very hard and enjoying the exquisiteness of the game, and at the same time you can look across the net at your opponent and smile at the beauty of the day. And it's that multiple level, and then it becomes N levels. It's like baklava, you know, it's so many levels you can't even count. Yes?
I'd like to ask a question that is the reverse of everything that I've been reading and hearing. I would like to know if there's been anything done on the opposite side of the coin, that what happens when a person has a psychedelic experience, an aesthetic, sensitive, kind, loving person is going through a psychedelic experience in a squalid, dirty, unpleasant, raucous surroundings. Have there been any such experiments, and how have they resulted?
Many more than any of us can imagine.
Could you tell me what happens?
Well, it seems to be true. Tim pointed this out a long time ago, that at first it appears that you seem to be very dependent on the setting, and that your set or preparation can very easily be overridden by bad setting. And then as you get more experienced and more trusting of the process, you can ride through, if you will, bad settings because of the strength of your set. And finally, if you're a truly enlightened holy man, you can move through any setting without ever, if you will, losing this consciousness. And if you consider for a moment, you realize that the drugs are a setting, because they are an external thing that is part of that environment, or your body, which is a setting for your consciousness also. And you can understand that finally the point is of being fully conscious without any of these external, if you will, dependency of some sort. Now, there are a number of reports of people who have been in bad settings, who have had very bad experiences. Now, let me describe what bad is, because that's a big topic these days. See, I haven't been one of these people that's arguing for strong controls, and I'm not worried about what's happening. I'm sorry, I just can't join the throng. I'd like to, but I don't, and I know an awful lot of teenagers. I had a very interesting evening recently in Los Angeles. I met with a group of mothers and fathers and sons and daughters. Sons and daughters were all 15 and 16 years old, and they were all taking LSD, and the parents were all upset. That was the definition of the two groups. On one side were upset parents, and on the other side were teenagers, drugged teenagers. And the parents started out with the accusing, "You've done this to our children." And the boys, one of the boys said, "Now, Mother." And there was one really great line in that whole meeting when one of the mothers said, "The thing about my son is that he's gotten so good. I wish he'd be bad like an adolescent. He's thoughtful, he's loving, he wants me to take LSD with him. He brings his girlfriend to the house, and it's all wonderfully." She says, "This isn't what adolescence is supposed to be doing. It doesn't feel natural to me." Right? Now, as I've been interviewing literally hundreds of teenagers who have been using LSD, because I do spend a great deal of my time, if you will, out in the field, doing sociological surveys, I found out that most of the sessions that kids are having quite loosely, they are spending a great deal of energy struggling with, and they spend a great deal of time in very tense, high energy output because they have no calm center. But the other thing I noticed is that something happens to them over time, whether they went into it for that reason or not, that gets them starting to listen. A group starts out, for example, I talked to one 16-year-old a couple of weeks ago. He said, "The first time I took acid, I was at a party in Los Angeles, and somebody was handing around these things, and they said they were LSD, and it would be a gas, and we'd all have a sexual ball, and so I took them, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I spent all the time in the bathroom on the floor, crying." Now, first of all, the disposition of that particular case depends completely on who he comes in contact with next. The evidence is very clear. If he comes in contact with somebody who does not understand what the psychedelic experience is about, the likelihood is that that fellow will move off into a short-term psychotic episode, because he will be surrounded by people who think he is crazy. And that is the setting in which he would then function. So the police, and like I was talking to a doctor who's here, who is part of a research group studying this problem, and they have intakes every night in their hospital for bad reactions. And I said, well, what do you do when the guy gets there? Well, we put him in a room. We have a nurse go and sit with him. Well, has she ever had the experience? Oh, of course not. Well, now, I'll show you a simple thing like this. If you are sitting in the middle of a very wild internal tangle, and anybody asks you a question, like, how are you feeling? Right? Very reasonable, loving question. Come in, what nurse wouldn't ask that question? How are you feeling now? That is enough to push a person off into the wildest isolating experience. And it would seem to me an obvious thing, in view of the data we know on set and setting, that every hospital should have a trained psychedelic person there. And when a person comes in, he is put with this individual who sits with him and who understands what's happening. The evidence is, if you end up with somebody who does understand, and what we've been getting for years now, telephone calls all hours of the night and day. Like a girl called me the other day, a month ago actually. She said, I took LSD 5 days ago and I'm still high and I'm scared. And I keep going up and coming down. Am I insane? Right? Now, I said to her, well, you know, you're really very lucky. Because most of us, after a session, have to wait a long time before we can explore again. And by your being able to go in and out, you can explore levels of consciousness and build the bridges much faster than the rest of us can. You can make a tremendous amount of gain in understanding your own samsara. And call me every day and let me know. Gal was joyous. Now, what are the probabilities that you would have gotten that reaction from any hospital, any other situation you would have turned to in our society? So it is true that bad settings lead these kids to bad experiences. But this kid said an interesting thing. He said, after that experience, I knew there was something there, but I wasn't going to have it with them anymore. And what I did was I went out and I bought some acid. And I got my best friend, and we went down by the ocean. This is 16 years old. And we sat on a rock, and we looked out at the ocean, and we took LSD. Now, is that wisdom? Is that social irresponsibility? Is it some kind of guts information? But it's this kind of business. And I guess you see what you're ready to look for. The people that come in contact with me obviously are not the people that are having these horrible nightmares that we're reading all about. The best evidence is that it's well worth working to make the setting good. And by a good setting, it really means a very safe and secure place. People you trust and love, a place where you will not be disturbed. No likelihood there's going to be a knock on the door or a telephone call. Turn it all off. Have a babysitter for the children. It's got to be a completely a protected environment from the unexpected until you know better what you're doing. Out in nature, if you can provide a secure, quiet enough place, great. And then surround yourself with things that are in tune with the universe. And the fewer things you have created by men's minds, the better. Therefore, rocks, water, candles, dirt, wood, a fireplace, all good. And if you have Indian Oriental rugs or Indian prints, these, after all, are probably the hashish fantasies of somebody or other. Questions? Yes. I think we'll stop in about 2 more questions.
Do you have any suggestions for anybody who has a higher level of consciousness than the ordinary society to live in peace in that society without going insane?
Well, I think the question reflects that the level isn't high enough. Because as I understand it, as one increases one's consciousness, one is able to see more and more ways in which to be in tune with the world around you. Now, at first, you feel somewhat separate from it. But then, after all, if the experience is indeed a unitive one, like, I'll tell you a very interesting experience. I was going east with a friend of mine who was a very advanced guy. And we got to Chicago, and we were both, just from driving across the country together and being together, we were both extremely high, wide open, just in this little Volkswagen, speeding across the country. We got to Chicago, and he said, well, when I leave you now, everybody I meet, I'm going to try to make a real contact with. Now, this was a challenge, and this horrified me, because I was about to go to a set of technical meetings on computer programming, and I was going to then go to my parents' home, and the task looked Herculean. And I started out, and I found myself at University of Illinois in an elderly mathematician's office. And he was behind his mask of being an elderly mathematician. And I looked at him, with love and with openness, and, We have become very good friends, I am happy to report. The thing worked for about 4 days, until I had just worn down. Because the energy involved in, right? But I don't find any boredom in finding things to do, nor do I find it that the world isn't totally open to being lived at the highest level I can reach at all times. And it is merely my own ability to get rid of me before I can find the place in it all. I think I'll stop now, because I'm...
When my own experience was culminating, a research assistant took me to a very little room, and then she brought this gigantic strobe, and in the next moment there was light like I had never seen in my life. My consciousness was catapulted out of my body. I lost the research assistant, I lost the clinic, I lost Prague, I lost the planet. And then I have the feeling that I was completely extinguished. I ceased to exist in the form in which I knew myself. And instead I had the feeling that I somehow became all of existence. I became nothing, but by becoming nothing, I became everything. I was in the astronomical universe. I was the universe. And there were things happening for which at the time I didn't even have name. But later I read about the Big Bang and the black holes and white holes and wormholes, which was an amazing cosmic spectacle. And then she turned it off, my consciousness started shrinking again, I became myself. But there was a problem because I ended up finding the planet, finding the clinic, finding my body, but my consciousness was kind of floating around the body and I couldn't find ways of aligning those two. At that point it was absolutely clear to me that what they taught me in the university, that consciousness is somehow created by the activity of the neurons in the brain suddenly. It's totally absurd. I mean, it's clear to me that consciousness was a cosmic phenomenon.